Hello, and welcome everybody to the NAAS Roundtable. I'm so excited to have everyone here in a safe and comfortable virtual space where we can all come together and learn more about the work that's being done in the orchestra field to increase diversity in American orchestras. I'm Bill Neary, the Sphinx's manager of ensemble advancement and artist engagement, where I manage the National Alliance for Audition Support, or NAAS for short, as we call it. Before we get started, I just want to give a huge thank you to my superhuman colleagues at Sphinx Organization for organizing this virtual convening and making all of this possible. You guys are rock stars. Before I dive into the specifics of what NAAS is and the progress we've made over the years together with our partners, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce my guest speakers that are joining me today. Each of my friends here are longtime supporters and partners of Sphinx and represent integral components of the work that we do here at NAAS. Sabrina Bradford is a violinist and alumni of NAAS Financial Support and Audition Intensives and SOPA. She's done it all, the latter of which led her to her current position that she holds presently with the Minnesota Orchestra. Paul Piotrowski, Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra's Vice President of Orchestra and Production. Paul has served as co-chair of the committee tasked with developing the voluntary self-identification form, the first survey of its kind with the goal of collecting audition demographic information on an industry-wide scale. And Beth Keller-Long, Minnesota Orchestra's Vice President of Orchestra Administration, who has been instrumental in the partnership between our two organizations and has worked closely with NAAS to promote the recommended audition and tenure guidelines. Thank you all for joining me today. Both of the documents that I mentioned, the voluntary self-identification form and the NAAS recommended audition and tenure guidelines, those can both be found in the chat. I believe they're pinned there, so you can reference them throughout the conversation or at the end, and you can print them out and pin them to your wall because they're both very important documents, and excited to talk about both of them. You'll be hearing from all these guests in just a few moments, but first I'm excited to share a PowerPoint to all the overall impact that we've done over the years with NAAS. And while I present and speak with my panelists here, please don't hesitate to drop a question in the chat or use the Q&A feature. We'll have plenty of time to discuss and hear from you all and bring everybody into this conversation. NAAS is the unprecedented national initiative to increase diversity in American orchestras. It is an artist-centric initiative with the goal of supporting Black and Latinx orchestral musicians through financial support, audition training, and audition previews. NAAS was launched in 2018 with the generous support of the Mellon Foundation in partnership with the Sphinx Organization, New World Symphony, and the League of American Orchestras. The initial 4-year term has been renewed to continue Mellon support through 2024. So just a big, huge, enormous grand slam thank you to Mellon for their partnership and support. We're really thankful for all of that help. Additionally, the Alliance's partnership is augmented with the support from our NAAS orchestra partners. So far this year, we have 93 dues-paying orchestra partners. Each one of these orchestras not only contribute financially, but they also have a seat at the table to contribute their reactions and impressions on the makeup of the American orchestra field and pledge to support our goal of increasing diversity in American orchestras. We're incredibly grateful for their contributions and their support, and I'm excited to share the impact that they have helped us bring. By working closely with these partners, NAAS was able to compile a list of recommended audition and tenure guidelines, which were released to the field around this time last year. And this is a detailed document listing recommended practices for the audition and tenure processes that we believe will bring the orchestra world into a future where stages truly reflect the communities they serve. Throughout 2021, I've met with artistic and administrative leadership from dozens of our orchestra partners to hear back and share their feedback from other organizations to assist with obstacles that we faced implementing equitable hiring practices. So again, you can find a copy of these guidelines in the chat, and we'll talk more about this later on in the session when we hear from my guest speakers. NAAS is advised by and supported by groups of dedicated musicians, directors, and managers in the orchestra and higher education fields. And these advisors come to us from organizations like the New York Phil, Williamsburg Symphony, Midland Symphony, Cincinnati Symphony, the LA Phil, and countless others. We're also advised by the leadership of the American Federation of Musicians, the International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians, I see why they call it ICSOM for short, and the Regional Orchestra Players Association. NAAS being an artist-driven initiative, we're really dependent and reliant on the input and collaboration with experienced orchestra players. And so this team, the NAAS Artist Council, is a team of musicians who come to us from orchestras all over the country, whose combined experience of performing in American orchestras provide us with invaluable input for our project. So financial support, right? Financial support is the main component of support we provide for NAAS artists. The goal for this support is to help level the playing field and break down barriers for NAAS artists by directly supporting musicians with funds to pursue opportunities that would otherwise pose a financial strain. We're proud to share that since our launch, we've awarded 529 grants totaling over $490,000 in support. So we're nearly $500,000 in support directly to musicians to help them further their orchestral goals. 336 of these awards were audition grants. And so these grants are awarded to musicians prior to their travel to auditions around the country so they can focus their energy and attention on the performance rather than attaching their outcome to a financial strain. Another element of financial support is the substitute musician grant. These grants are used to fund travel and lodging for NAAS musicians pursuing substitute opportunities with orchestras. Subgrants have been used to bring NAAS musicians to orchestras like the Fort Worth Symphony, the Boston Symphony, and really so many others. And it's not uncommon for a musician to be offered work with an orchestra that would then require them to pay for a flight or for a car or for a hotel, either from an audition that they performed well in, a lesson they had with the principal, or from SOPA, which is something we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. No matter the size or location of the orchestra, NAAS will consider all substitute grant requests that will deliver high caliber artists of color to play with any US orchestra. And so over the years, we've awarded 100 substitute grants totaling almost $90,000. And the third grant that we offer our artists through financial support is the instrument grant. Now, this is funding used to support repairs, maintenance, and equipment purchases. And since our launch in 2018, we've awarded 93 instrument grants totaling over $100,000. And that went directly to artists to give them the tools they need to thrive in orchestras. And so if you're a musician interested in learning more about financial support or have an audition coming up and you need some support funding the travel and the hotel, please head over to our website, auditionalliance.org, to learn more about that. That's auditionalliance.org. Measurable results, right? So since 2018, 68 Black and Latinx musicians have won over 90 placements in American orchestras. This is including, but not limited to, 41 part-time and full-time fellowships positions, and 32 fellowship positions. NAAS artists have found themselves in orchestras like the Fort Worth Symphony, the Philadelphia Orchestra, Charlotte Symphony, Oregon Symphony, and so many others, in part because of the NAAS programming and support they received. So in addition to financial support, we also provide support to our artists through audition training. The audition intensives, as we call them, are essentially audition boot camps. They're inspired by our partners at the New World Symphony. We've held 5 of these intensives live in person in Miami at the New World Center in 2018 and 2019. And then the last 2 years, in 2020 and 2021, we hosted 3 online intensives. In total, we've trained 163 NAAS participants through our training programs. And in our first 2 years, in 2018 and 2019, there were 68 NAAS musicians that were trained during our audition intensives. These live intensives were 4-day boot camps where we featured a one-blind mock audition, coachings with faculty, and performance psychology training sessions with Noah Kagayama, the esteemed performance psychologist behind the Bulletproof Musician. And then in the next 2 years, 2020 and 2021, a testament to reaching new audiences through online platforms, and an idea that I'm sure resonates loudly with this virtual audience today, we were able to train dozens of new artists that we would have otherwise been unable to reach during our online intensives. With the flexibility and reach of a digital learning space, we were able to have 12 weeks of cumulative programming throughout the 2 years and connected over 100 artists with 35 faculty. The format for the online intensives doubled the number of mock auditions, where the participants would have an entrance and exit mock to give them an arc or an overview of the progress that they had over the weeks of hard work. And weekly lessons, group classes, master classes were all components of these online intensives. And finally, our third focus point for support are the audition previews, known best under the name SOPA. The Sphinx Orchestral Partners Audition provides musicians of color the unique opportunity to play an audition for a panel representing many orchestras who are there seeking to identify musicians for placement opportunities. In past years, SOPA would bring 50 Black and Latinx orchestral musicians to Detroit during the annual Sphinx convening to play blind auditions on Detroit's Orchestra Hall, where dozens of orchestra representatives would listen in real time on the other side of a screen. And this time around, our auditions were not only remote, but were paired with our second annual excerpt competition. And with the help from our program's initiators and designers, Weston Sprott and Titus Underwood, we introduced cash prizes to SOPA so that musicians can train the competitive skill set, something that really can only be addressed and harnessed in a real competitive scenario. The inaugural SOPA excerpt competition was last year, and the 2022 excerpt competition is still in progress. 135 candidates submitted blind, audio-only recordings in December, just over a month ago, which were then shared with nearly 500 musicians representing 75 orchestra partners. So using the votes cast by these orchestra representatives, we were able to invite a limited number of candidates to a live final blind round audition to be held later on this year. The details of the live final round are still being worked out, and once we have a date confirmed, we are going to communicate that to all of our partners and, of course, all of the candidates, and hope that we could have a really big impact that way as well. To best address the concerns of equity in SOPA auditions, them being audio submissions, we provide a high-quality microphone to every SOPA candidate that needs one. The prizes totaling over $15,000 include a $3,500 first prize and a $1,000 second prize for our 3 finalist categories. And the categories are for strings and harp, woodwinds, and brass and percussion. There are also $250 cash prizes awarded to each of the most outstanding instrument candidates. Most importantly, in this overview of SOPA, we have to talk about the guarantee or the commitment that our orchestra partners make. And so each of these 75 orchestra partners guarantee an offer of work as a substitute or extra musician for no less than 1 week to at least one SOPA candidate to perform with their orchestra at any point in the following concert season. And so far this year, relating back to last year's SOPA auditions, SOPA has led to placements like the 3 one-year positions in the Minnesota Orchestra. You'll be hearing from one of these winners in just a minute. And one-year positions with the Baltimore Symphony, the Charlotte Symphony, and the North Carolina Symphony. There were also 11 fellowship positions awarded by Classical Tahoe, and of course, numerous substitute musician weeks. And in total, there will be a minimum of 75 weeks of orchestral engagement for SOPA artists. So a big thank you to the support from this year's SOPA participating orchestras. And hopefully with all that content I shared, I'm sure there's some topics and curiosities and questions from the attendees and the people in the audience here. So a quick reminder, take advantage of this Q&A feature in the chat. So keep some questions coming. I'm really excited to add lots of input into this conversation. And I think we're good with the slides here. Great. And so now, I'm excited to bring everyone's attention back to my awesome speakers. So I have a couple things I want to bring up, some topics and questions to share with each of these. And so I'll start with Sabrina, if that's all right. I'm sure there are some talented, aspiring orchestral musicians of color in the audience. Can you just tell them a little bit about the support you've received from NAAS and the impact it's made both on the stage and off the stage for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done pretty much almost every NAAS program you can think of. I think I've gotten like all the possible grants you can get. The financial support is life-changing. To be able to take an audition and not have to worry about not only not advancing, but also then being out, $1,000, depending on how far you have to travel and the costs incurred. It really allows you to just focus on what you want to do, what you came there to do, and just really just do the best possible job that you can. It's also with the substitute opportunities. It enables you to be able to take advantage of the work that's being offered to you, because oftentimes if you get invited to sub with an orchestra that you've never been to, you don't know anyone in that town, you're there for a whole week, hotel or Airbnb costs get expensive, you don't have anyone to stay with, so you're losing out maybe too on work that you have at home, but you still want to go take advantage of this great opportunity to go play with a new orchestra, or maybe one that you've been to before. And so it actually enables you to go take advantage of what's out there. And just the community too, and the support that I've gotten from other SOPA artists and other NAAS artists. I was part of the inaugural fellows at Classical Tahoe this past summer, and so we had 11 of us who all did the SOPA Excerpt Competition, and that was a really great sense of community there, and we were really able to connect on a deeper level about the issues that we're all here speaking about this weekend, bouncing ideas off of each other, talk about the change that we want to see enacted, what works, what doesn't. So the sense of community too has been a really crucial part of doing all of the NAAS and the SOPA projects.
Great, that's so awesome. Great to hear from you, Sabrina. And now let's bring this over to Paul. This is a slight gear shift here. So we're talking about the voluntary self-identification form. So can you just give us a little bit of a background? I believe it's pinned to the chat here. So this is a big topic for all the managers and directors and executives in the audience here. So what went into this form? What's some of the background and some of the goals for voluntary self-identification form?
Sure. So let me start in 2018. As part of our strategic planning in Cincinnati, we participated in an organizational-wide DE&I audit. And the audit examined our workplace culture and our business systems, such as like our hiring practices, through a DE&I lens. And one of the many items that was revealed in this audit was the lack of data. So the CSO then developed a voluntary self-identification form that was used to track race, ethnicity, and gender. We wanted to understand who we engage, from the guest artists to the conductors, our volunteers, the vendors, musicians, everybody from the front of the house to the back of the house. And we wanted to use that information to help inform our strategies moving forward. So in 2020, Bill from NAAS reached out to me about developing a self-identification form for other orchestras so they can use this tool to track their audition candidates. Similar to the NAAS recommended guidelines for audition and tenure that was released, this tool would be available to all the partner orchestras as they examine their hiring practices, but also an important barometer for the field as we examine the aggregated data collected from all the partner orchestras. So just like a quick review of how the process went down. First, we had to gather a committee, and we were looking for a committee of a variety of experiences and expertise. So as a co-chair, Rochelle Skolnick, who's the director of symphonic services at AFM. We also had Damari McGill, principal flute in Seattle, Rachel Kunch, who's the assistant director of admissions in Cleveland, John Michael Smith from ROPA, and Brittany Jimenez from the USC Thornton School of Music, and JT Kane, the vice president for musician advancement and the dean of orchestra for New World. It was a great group. I learned a lot from these individuals. The group had to tackle first some important questions. And one of those important questions are, why are we collecting this data? It was critical that we answer this question. Why are we asking an audition candidate to volunteer information to us? And how do we build trust that this information will be used in an appropriate way? So we came up with a commitment to inclusion statement. So if you look at the form, it's found at the very top. It's the first thing an applicant sees. And this statement says that orchestras attain unparalleled heights of artistry when they celebrate broad-based audience and community engagement, and when we understand, embrace, and act upon principles of equity, diversity, inclusion. We also are asking the applicants to help us provide information so that we can use that information and organizations can use it to examine their behaviors and provide a better understanding of barriers to diversity inclusion in the audition process. Second question we had to answer is who will have access to this information? The committee felt it was important to disclose the aggregated data with everybody who shared all our stakeholders. So these stakeholders being NAAS, the AFM, the League, ICSOM, ROPA, the Sphinx organization, and of course, the individual orchestra that our applicants applying for in the local union there. So the form was developed with partnerships from all these organizations, and it was important to make clear that all these organizations are committed to working together in our data collection efforts. And then how will this data be included in the audition process? We didn't want to prescribe per orchestra how you include the form, because we understand and recognize that every orchestra has a different way and they process resumes and applications. But we wanted to have a process where there's a tool they can use in their process. So for example, in Cincinnati, we collect this information in 2 stages. First, we collect it in the resume submission application phase. Everybody who applies for a position is given the opportunity to volunteer their information to us. In addition, we collected the same information at the end of the process, because it's important for us not to only capture who applies, but who also shows up to an audition in Cincinnati. Finally, where do we go from here? There's a lot of work ahead for all of us. Yes, we have a tool now to collect information, but how does an orchestra use this tool to inform decision-making moving forward and hold itself accountable? One major opportunity I see is examining your recruitment efforts. You'll see on this form, there's 2 data points. There's the zip code data point, and also where did you hear about this audition? And I suspect that this is some important points for an orchestra to examine as they make decisions on how to focus resources to reach all applicants. There's also more information we need to gather. What hurdles are preventing people from showing up to my audition? Do I notice any trends in losing applicants from the resume round to when they show up to the audition? And an important thing to maybe consider is to deploy an after audition survey to understand why some of this happens. And finally, feedback. From your audition experience. Many applicants find it, receiving comments from their audition committee as an important part of their development and their audition preparation. It's also important for an orchestra ask their candidates for comments to improve their process. If you are in the audition circuit, you receive a survey about your experience, these comments are so valuable and important to share. So I could probably spend hours, talking about data collection and its use in the audition process, and I'm happy to connect with anybody who's interested in talking more. But thank you, Bill, for the space and time to share a little bit about the form.
Thank you, Paul. And just like a quick follow-up question, just to shine some more light on this. So for the orchestra managers or personnel managers or directors of orchestra personnel that are listening right now, what would you say to them is like the best way to utilize the document? I know there are different ways of implementing it in the audition process. So can you talk just a little bit about where in the life cycle of an audition process this could be implemented and how?
In Cincinnati, we found the best way to incorporate the applicant self-identification form is through the initial phase and through as easy as possible an online application. We started the process by emailing a PDF form and asking people to send it back, but we saw about 14% of our total applicants never responded with their applicant data. Since implementing into an online application system, we're only around 5% now. So the easier you can make the process for somebody to fill out, the better results I think you're going to find. There's also one other key, we thought about when somebody is on site and they're doing their audition, their mind is going everywhere. They're thinking about the moment, they're thinking about the excerpts, the time they're going to spend on stage and performing the best of their ability. So we didn't want to add an extra step to somebody when they show up to the audition. Oftentimes they forget their name because they're so focused on the audition. So after the audition part is over, we found that this is another opportunity to say, thank you for coming to our audition. If you would like comments, we will try to send it to you. And also, could you fill out this form as we track our, the barriers in our process? And we found that to be successful too at the end of the process.
Yeah, that's a really mindful way of approaching it, making sure that the actual audition time that they're in the space is they can focus as much as they can on performance. Great, thanks for that, Paul. Now, Beth, the audition and tenure guidelines is another document I mentioned and talked about. Again, can be found in the chat. And so this was released around this time last year, and I know it's made the rounds around a lot of orchestras, and I know Minnesota Orchestra has received many of the points outlined in the document with an open mind. So can you just talk about the mood around the implementation of the audition and tenure guidelines, some of the conversations that you can talk about that you've had with Minnesota Orchestra musicians, and what you can look forward to in terms of audition and tenure practices?
Sure. So we have a DEI committee at the Minnesota Orchestra that is made up of board staff and musicians. And the musicians of our DEI committee have really, they have formed this really, supportive group and working really intentionally to advance these guidelines. And so they have, I would say the musicians have taken this on as their work that they are doing. So the musicians on the DEI committee have been working with the orchestra committee, with the principals of all of the sections, and then ultimately held a meeting of the full orchestra to approve some of these guidelines for the Minnesota Orchestra auditions. Our CBA is maybe a little different than some in that it has a lot of latitude for auditions. Each audition committee determines its own guidelines, which have to then be approved by the orchestra committee and the management. So there is a lot of latitude in auditions, but I think the DEI committee musicians were really smart about how they went about this in building consensus and working together on building consensus around this. So where they landed with this full orchestra vote was wanting to that first recommendation about having auditions open to all candidates, not screening on resumes. There was broad consensus on that, broad consensus on doing recruiting. And we have a section viola audition that's coming up in February. And just looking so far at the tracking that we do with just like an EEO form, the recruiting that's happening seems to be having a result. It seems to be a more diverse candidate pool that's at least registering for this audition. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with this. This is the first audition since these guidelines have been enacted at the Minnesota Orchestra. So I think it'll be interesting to track how this goes. As Paul says, data is so important. And so to look at how this evolves. And the musicians of the DEI committee are, this has been a change takes a long time, and they're going to keep working on this intentionally, and it will keep evolving. And I think it's going to be really exciting and interesting to see how this continues to evolve. And I guess the other thing I would say is I think because of the work that the Minnesota Orchestra has been doing over the last 2.5 years about working towards becoming an anti-racist organization, it sort of set this foundation where all of these conversations could happen. And so we've had these anti-racist learning projects that have been going on for the last about 2.5 years. The board just approved some anti-racist guiding principles for decision making. Anti-racism now is built into our strategic plan that was just approved. So all of that intersects to support this work that our musicians are doing around the audition guidelines.
That's awesome. And not to put too much of what's happening under the hood on the spot, but I know there are some guidelines that don't immediately get 100% buy-in. And buy-in is a question I'm sure we've talked a lot about this weekend. I'm sure a lot of other sessions are going over that. It's one thing to have a DEI task force or committee to have 100% buy-in, but it's another to have the entire musician body, the entire organization as a whole to have like full support behind this. So I'm just curious, what types of obstacles do you face in sort of attracting and maintaining that type of buy-in? It might have to do with a specific guideline or not, but just curious about what the organization does to navigate those obstacles.
Yeah, we did a session yesterday about some of the work we've been doing around communications, and we've been working with Justin Lang at Halembo, and he has been talking with us about the productive zone of disequilibrium, and like being in that space where change happens. Like you can't create too much chaos because then it all falls apart. You also can't create too little because then change doesn't happen. So where is that productive zone of disequilibrium? And that's something we've been talking about a lot and working on a lot too. So I think that's part of what we've been thinking about. Where is that productive zone where we can make change, but it doesn't just like throw it all into chaos? So as I say, I think our musicians have been really intentional about that. I don't know. Does that get at what you're wanting there, Bill?
Yeah, I think maybe it throws some ideas into people listening. Maybe they could have some follow-up questions around that topic too.
I think also, and I'm seeing some of these questions that are coming in, there maybe isn't consensus about what is the best way to do this. Like we're all trying to figure that out. Some people say, well, there should be screens the whole way through. And then others are like, well, no screens, that isn't the answer. So that's part of the problem too, is we're trying to figure out what is the best way to accomplish this. We all are in the field are trying to figure that out. Yeah.
One of the most consistent questions or comments I get about the guidelines sometimes is to do with the screens, but also a lot to do with I think it's the first point, the resumes, no screening of resumes, and having the capacity to hear everybody. And I know some orchestras as policy have been, even predating the guidelines, have been able to do that. So curious about specifically that one and any pushback or the mood around that guideline.
Are you specifically asking me, or also Paul? Or
also Paul? Yeah, I'll bring Paul into this one too.
Yeah, Paul. What are you getting on that?
No, it's a great question because orchestras, and I know every orchestra is like this. We have very busy schedules, and the time the musician spends for auditions is intense. So finding room not only in your hall schedule, but also in your music director's schedule to have auditions, there is that hurdle. There's that challenge of how many people can you fit in? And then if you can't invite everybody, how are you going to make it a fair and equitable process to be invited? And so one of the conversations that we've been having with our committee is reevaluating what is a resume round and what qualifications are you looking for? Because often the committee gathers and everybody has their own set of expectations of what qualified means. But qualified now, it's not the same as qualified maybe 30 years ago. And so there's so many opportunities that a musician can be a part of. For example, being a part of NAAS or SOPA, using those qualities on a resume as additional skill sets and additional experience to get people to our auditions. And I know some orchestras are deploying the ability to send in audio recordings beforehand. So if you don't make a resume round, send an audio recording. And there's also challenges around that. Bill, you talked about supplying high quality microphones for people so that they can be able to represent themselves the best. Also, it's just the challenges of listening on the other end, that a committee member is not listening on an iPhone speaker, but everybody's listening on the same equipment. So lots of things to think about. Yes.
Some of the other things we've been talking about is just like strategic scheduling or split committees. Like what are ways that we can accommodate larger numbers of applicants? And so that's something that's been incorporated into the discussions here as well.
I think it's great though that committees are talking about this stuff now. There's been many, many times that this discussion hasn't happened. So everybody's now coming to the table together and agreeing that, hey, we need to make better efforts to diversify our candidates. And so how do we make that happen? Those conversations are happening. Now we just have to act.
Yeah, and if I could plug one of NAAS's programs with SOPA, So we were able to bring in 135 candidates. Each one recorded an audition, and it was heard by 500 musicians, all within the span of a couple of days. And to advocate for a recorded submission process as in lieu of a preliminary round audition, which I know some orchestras do, the way that we accommodate that is we have a audition list of however many, 15, 20 excerpts is standard for a normal professional audition. And we select the preliminary round excerpts of five excerpts or an 8-minute prelim round audition. And we release those at a very specific time that we communicate to the candidates in advance. So we tell them, and they have months to prepare for this, at 1 p.m. on this day, we're going to tell you what you have to play. And you'll have 2 hours to record those excerpts and then upload it to this link. And that, in a way, kind of emulates the live audition process that you walk into the building and then you finally see what you're going to play that day. So they can't really prepare that far in advance and record every single minute of the audition. We don't allow editing or splicing. It has to be one through single take audio file. And it's been really successful. I think we've gotten a lot of buy-in from individual players from orchestras that have been a part of that. So another big success for this process has been familiarizing individual musicians from orchestras, no longer just the personnel managers or just the people that they can send to Detroit, but we could really bring the audition to them. So that's just another idea to throw out there. A question that came in was about Canadian orchestras. Paul, I don't know if you saw this one. How can Canadian orchestras implement the identification form?
So we are working, Canada has different reporting requirements than the US. So we are actively looking at that and would love to connect with all my Canadian colleagues about how we can make this form work for you.
Great. So another question about preparing for an audition or taking advantage of NAAS support. I'll bring this one over to Sabrina. So just to put somebody in the mindset, if you have an audition, imagine you have an audition coming up in 2 months, what are the steps you could take to get NAAS involved, and what outcomes can you anticipate?
Yeah, so the first thing you could do is get your travel and lodging covered for the audition. So that's the audition grant. So if you have your audition invitation already, then I would go ahead and just apply for that, get that sorted. And then the other program that's really helpful is NAAS will cover a lesson, the cost of a lesson, either virtual or in person. So you can, even if you don't know the person, say you want to take a lesson with one of the section leaders, NAAS will arrange that for you. Or, if you want to go play for your teacher, NAAS will also cover that. So I would apply to both and see what happens.
Yeah, a big seconding that coaching and mentorship support.
Yeah,
that's something we provide. So if you have someone you're already in contact with, a teacher that you enjoy working with, or a player you've never met before and have always wanted to play with them or play for them, we can step in. We communicate with the teacher and the coach, and we fund those lessons directly. So you don't have to worry about asking the principal player how much do they charge or anything like that. We handle all of that, so you could just focus again on performance and training and doing the best work you can possibly do. So again, we have more time here. So if you have questions, please keep them coming in. I'd be curious, Sabrina, to bring some more light to you. We were talking about identification forms, recommended audition tenure guidelines, all this kind of stuff. With someone who's really just focusing on just wanting to play their best, what are some of your takeaways and reactions to all this admin driven stuff?
In what way specifically?
So when you hear people talking about the screening of resumes or blind auditions, I mean, I know sometimes as a performer myself, I just simplifying. I was I just want to play the music and just, get a chance to play more of it. But there's so much, red tape and other things that come along the way. So what are your takeaways of playing blind auditions, feeling more or less comfortable behind a screen, and things like that?
I mean, I think that's playing behind or in front of the screen, I think that's, you ask 5 different people what they prefer and you'll get 5 different answers. I mean, for me, when there isn't a screen, it feels more like a performance. You can engage a little bit more directly. Sometimes with a screen, it doesn't, it feels like cut off in a way. But there was a great point that was brought up in the comment section about how from Fort Worth said that they decided to follow as many of the NAAS audition recommendations as possible with no resume screenings, and screens were up the whole time, and the winner was an early career Latinx musician. So yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time creating these guidelines for a reason, is to get the results that we want. Ultimately, I think we kind of have to be focused on the results. Are we seeing, is the work that we're doing getting us where we want to be? And that's where the data collection comes in and why that part is so important. I think, you know, more generally though, in terms of like the experience of the different orchestras that I've played in, and I've held a couple of one-year positions, I do see overall individual musicians in orchestras all across the country like really wanting to commit to the change that we're discussing. Like overall, I do see a sense of, we want new people, we want people of color in our orchestras, we want our orchestras to be more diverse and reflect more the fabric of American society. I think, you know, the traditional symphony orchestra is about as conservative as an institution as you can get in a lot of ways. But I do see the change that is happening. People are very excited, and particularly in Minnesota, like speaking with members on the DEI committees who were really engaged and really excited about the new placements that I got, and my other colleagues who have these one-year positions got. They were really excited about the change that was happening in this season. So
That's
I don't know
awesome.
if that answers your question at all.
No, it's good. Good to hear that. Any reactions, Paul or Beth, to that before I go to another question? Cool. So one of these questions is about the ways of evaluating things beyond just musical excellence. I think it's the 7th guideline in the audition and tenure guidelines, and one that has generated a lot of conversation from a lot of different orchestras. And just keeping in mind too that it's not like a one size fits all approach, because so many orchestras, even within the same budget category, can be night and day from each other, the way they're run, the way their budgets are structured, the way their musicians are empowered or not empowered to make decisions. So maybe we could take a step back and hear from both Paul and Beth about how the job as a musician in your orchestras has changed over the years, and then bringing it to the idea of how are those skills, how do we measure those skills, if at all?
It's such a great question. Like, how do you incorporate that into the audition or tenure process? And it's such a tricky thing. I mean, certainly what we ask of our musicians has changed dramatically. And even thinking, you know, the history of the Minnesota Orchestra, we had the lockout, you know, in 2013. And so a lot of things have come out of that, where musicians have engaged so directly with the community. And we have musicians who are out in our lobby before every concert, welcoming people to the concert, and they are taking that upon themselves. So, you know, like, would that have happened, you know, a decade or two ago? Probably not, you know. So in that way, the jobs of musicians are changing. Being the community, excuse me, the community engagement is so different. And even at the Minnesota Orchestra, we have one of our core values is collaboration. And again, this is coming out of our lockout period. We have the Minnesota model, where musicians and staff and board, we have so many collaborative committees. And so again, that's a different way that musicians are involved. So, you know, how do you evaluate that? We don't have that as part of our auditions and tenure process, but I think it's a really interesting question.
Paul, same question. Maybe just a little bit of background on what the individual musician in Cincinnati Symphony, how has that job changed over the last 20, 30 years, and what can be done to measure those new skill sets?
Wow, it is a loaded question. And so just like Sabrina talks about screens, I think if you ask different people, you'll have many different answers. But in Cincinnati, our vision is to be the most relevant orchestra in America. And the only way you can be relevant is to look within your community, look at who you're serving, but also find people that line up with your vision. The first step to any vision test is see what your eyesight's like, and then make any adjustments through the lens for Cincinnati, through the lens of D&I. And so I'm seeing more younger musicians that are just starting their career that are looking actually to do more than sit on stage and play, excerpts or play classical music. And they're actually wanting to find opportunities where they can do more chamber music, where they can reach out to the community, where they can be, the face of an orchestra when they're meeting patrons or donors. So not only is the orchestra changing because we have different needs for our communities, but I think also our musicians are coming with the expectations too now to do more for an orchestra than just perform on stage. But it's a good question. How do you have like an interview process or a different evaluation process after the audition? And I would love to see some answers from my colleagues in other orchestras and see how they tackle that question.
Yeah, and I know this is more of like anecdotal data, but out of the NAAS artists, I think I mentioned 68 NAAS artists have won placement since 2018. And so many of the ones that I've spoken to personally are so eager to just get through the tenure process, get tenure so that they could be on these committees and help make decisions, be part of have a larger role in their local union and in their communities. And so many of the structures that are put in place were put there years ago when the organization was different, the community might have been different, the city was different, and the makeup of the orchestra looked very different. The music they're playing is different, and all I think changing for the better very slowly. But I wonder what can be done to bring orchestras to make it feel more comfortable for new players to make more of a change, make more of an impact, so that the orchestras there's a lot of openings, a lot of newer, younger players are getting jobs these days. So as orchestras get younger and younger, hopefully there will maybe be more room for these types of changes to be made. I don't know, Sabrina, if you have any input on this type of, like, if you were to show up to an audition and play your excerpts, and instead of sight reading, they asked you to, do some mock teaching, or if you were interviewed, just to have like a spoken interview, just to get to know yourself more. Do you think that would be an asset? I might be shooting myself in the foot here, but would that be an asset and help yourself in the process, or do you think that would hold you back?
I think in a way, they're like, yes, the whole reason why we do this is because we love music and we want to play music, and that's the whole reason why we went into this career. But like we've been talking about, the job is a little different now. There's more to it than just showing up to rehearsal prepared and playing a different program every week. So in a way, is someone, and also the way that tenure gets handled, kind of how do we determine if someone is going to be a good fit for our organization? And so if that gets included somehow in the audition process rather than waiting until tenure review for that to happen, I think that might be a good thing to explore. I don't know if it's an interview necessarily, like, in a more like traditional corporate setting. If we're going to do like 4 rounds of interviews, I don't know if that's the way to handle it either, but something that makes the process a little bit more human, I think, would be, something to consider. That it's not just, all right, show up, play your excerpts, do a trial a week, and we'll let you know.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, to make it more human. Yeah, thank you for that. So there's a question about the screening of resumes. So I know we talked about that just for briefly a couple minutes ago. when screening of resumes does take place, and I'm sure both of you have been part of orchestras, Paul and Beth, that have implemented that. What's the best way to screen resumes? So if you're talking to a personnel manager and you were to give input on the resume screening process to make it as equitable and fair as possible, what steps can be done to make that more fair if they will be screening resumes? I already know my advice is to not screen resumes, but if it's already happening, if they're going to have to wait another season before they could implement this guideline, what in the past have your organizations done, Paul or Beth?
I was kind of waiting for Beth to respond first. So I want to first say that, Cincinnati doesn't have the answers. I mean, we're still learning about how to best look at resumes and the effect of the resumes. Plus, the last 18, 20 months, we haven't been able to have auditions. And so things are different now than back, 20 months ago. But in general, I think if you have a clear expectation from the committee and a fair rubric to use. Now, how do you find out a fair rubric? Well, you have to gather the committee, figure out what is important to do this job description, this position, and then try to remove all identifying information and just look at, the experience and what this person could bring to the organization. But something else I would bring up to people, like, even though there's a resume round, I know here in Cincinnati we're like this, and I'm sure in other orchestras, there's still opportunities. Let's say you get denied, to participate in an audition because of your resume round. There's other opportunities to reach out, ask to be on a waiting list, or even things could open up last minute. So there's ways that you could still participate here in Cincinnati. Even if you just show up on the day of the audition, we're going to take you and we're going to find a spot for you in the audition. So.
I just want to agree with what Paul said as some good options for thinking about that, but to really encourage some creative thinking about ways to not have that resume round. Like, what could you do so that you wouldn't have that? Could you have a split committee? Could you, is there a way that you could really invite everyone who wants to attend?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we keep coming back to this idea. Let's just hear them play. Forget the resumes. I think one of the things I was going to talk about was a story I remember hearing at one of the SOPA audition sessions that we had in person a couple of years ago. A personnel manager from a major orchestra said something about a candidate that was denied an audition based on their resume. So they read their resume. They said this person's not qualified. They're still in school, or they're just don't have enough experience. And they said, submit a recording. So we've all gotten those before, right, Sabrina? Submit a recording instead. And then you submit the recording. They say, no, we heard you. We don't think you're good enough. Don't come. And then still this person emailed them and said, like, if there's a spot, if there's a wait list opportunity just to be put on the audition, please let me attend. And they said, yeah, sure. And then the day before they said, at 1 p.m. tomorrow, can you come to the audition? They drove over and then they won the job. And so it's it's just one person, one story. So I know it's not indicative of the entire field and every single musician that's getting turned down out there, but it highlights some flaws that are there based on the recording processes or the resume processes and who might be looking at them and the ways they might be looking at them. And everyone brings their own bias and their own experience of what they think is qualified on their resume. They could be looking at where they live or what school they went to or what teacher they studied with. And those are all, in our heads when we're looking at those things. So trying to just bring it back to the performance as much as possible. There was a question about international students and work visa sponsorship and how that might affect their hireability. I'm sure one of the admins here can talk a little bit about that, but from my understanding that there's certain times in the visa process, depending on the visa, where you're eligible to be considered for work. I know there's some stringent rules, a lot of fine print, but I hope that doesn't affect hireability of a candidate, just their work status. I don't know if that ever makes its way onto a resume or application, Paul, when you do these intakes, is that a question that's asked? I'm sure, are you eligible to work in the United States might be a legal requirement to ask for any employee.
So we will listen to anybody regardless of your eligibility. So you're open to apply for the job and audition. And then once you win the job, the organization can be a sponsor for you. And there's a lot of paperwork, but fortunately I know Cincinnati's been through this a number of times. We have a formula. We usually work with somebody's lawyer to submit supporting evidence, and we help the person through the process to get the visa.
Great, thanks for clearing that up. And I just saw something come up in one of the comments or in the chat about regional orchestras. I don't know if it's related to auditions or for substitute opportunities, but I wanted to reemphasize the substitute musician grants that we offer musicians. I've had a lot of orchestra managers contact me, some regional orchestras, folks in ROPA, that say, I doubt this person would want to accept this substitute invitation. They live too far away. They're not going to want to come here. They won't be able. They lose money if they came out here. So just a reminder about substitute musician grants. So if you're, I know Sabrina lives in Minnesota, but if you're a small orchestra in Florida that wants to invite her to play with you, for one, it's really on her to say yes or no. It's not. So please, if you want to have them play for you, you could, always ask. And the resources are available to her and a lot of other NAAS artists just like her, that they can apply for funding to pay for the flight, Airbnb or hotel, and per diem for incidental expenses they might incur. So we really are trying to, and I've succeeded, I think, in eliminating any and all financial obstacles that are preventing musicians like Sabrina and so many others like her from coming and playing with your orchestra, whether it's for a week or for more. So we just have a few minutes left. Maybe if each of you has just a final closing remark, or just a little bit more, if anything that's still circling in your head that you want to get out there before we wrap things up. I'll start with Sabrina. I don't know if you had anything.
Okay.
Anything to NAAS artists out there or anything like that.
Sure. We're talking all about how we increase hiring diversity and ways of making sure that we're being fair and equitable from the start before anyone shows up to an audition. I think it's always important to remember that the work that we're doing also translates over to once we're in those organizations, to make sure that on every level of the institution that there is support in place for musicians of color, because otherwise then you're just putting musicians of color in unsafe spaces, and that's something that we want to avoid, obviously. So I think, just the big takeaway is it's more than just how do we get them, it's once they're there, how do we make sure that they are welcome and that they feel safe and comfortable.
Really well said. Thank you. Beth?
I guess I just would go back to something I was saying before, is that, none of us have the answer to this, and so it's helpful to have these guidelines, and we're going to try the guidelines, and we're going to collect data, and we'll learn things, and we'll figure out new guidelines. And so we're going to keep, working trial and error to fix this long-term problem. And it's going to take time, but we are going to keep working on it, and looking forward to continuing to work on this.
Good stuff. Thanks, Beth. Paul?
Just what Beth and Sabrina said, to echo everything that you talked about. I just also want to thank Bill and NAAS and Sphinx and SOPA, because what you bring to the field and the amount of work that you've done so far, it's amazing. The slideshows that you showed us, the amount of support, the amount of placements that musicians have had, it's an amazing start. And I'm just so looking forward to what the years to come have. And so if you're not a partner orchestra, if you're sitting here in the chat and you're a musician of an orchestra, ask your management to be a partner, because it's super important for the field. And it's super important that we all contribute and support this.
Thank you, Paul. And I second that. If you are not a partner and you want to get involved, you can reach out to me, Bill at sphinxmusic.org. And just want to say thank you to these awesome speakers for taking the time to be part of this session today. Thank you to everyone that's joined us to be part of the discussion. Fantastic sessions going on today. And of course, the finals concert tonight. So I hope you all will tune in and have a great time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.